Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. Welcome back to Troll the Verse. This is episode 47, which means if you're just clicking on this now, you're going to want to hit the playlist and start at episode 45, where we kick off the Abraham and Isaac disaster arc. Today, we're in Genesis 22. God tells Abraham to murder his son to prove loyalty. And somehow, churches call this a moral high point. So we're walking through the original text line by line, word for word, with the actual verses on screen. Not the feel-good version they teach in Sunday school, the real one. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Also, like, comment, and subscribe, because nothing says thanks for ruining my childhood theology like feeding the algorithm. And while you're at it, check out the full playlist. We've got Genesis, Matthew, and Revelation, all starting at chapter 1. That's 3 biblical messes for the price of 0. And hey, we're also on Twitter now, where we currently have 1 follower. Big shout out to that guy. You're holding the line like a champ. Oh, and quick side note, I've been toying with the idea of doing Troll the Verse, Quran Edition, and maybe even a Scientology bonus series, but let's be honest, those are strike magnets on YouTube. So if I do them, they're going behind a members-only paywall, not because I'm scared, because YouTube melts down over anything that even breathes in the direction of Quran or Scientology criticism. Behind a paywall, it's opt-in, you choose to see it. YouTube can't pretend you were ambushed by a thumbnail and start clutching its community guidelines. Still figuring it out, but if that's something you'd actually want to see in the future, drop a comment. Or be the hero who becomes follower number 2 on Twitter. All right, Genesis 22, let's go. In some translations, like the King James Version, Genesis 22, one reads that God tempted Abraham, but James 1:13 says God does not tempt anyone. The Hebrew verb here can be understood as test or try, which aligns more with God testing Abraham's faith rather than tempting him to do evil. Right out of the gate here. Notice the phrasing in verse 2, your son, your only one whom you love, even Isaac. That phrasing though. Your son, as if there's any confusion. Your only son, even though Ishmael just got kicked out a chapter ago. It's like God's trying to legally establish paternity in real time. This is a story that's clearly trying to force a bloodline narrative that might not even be true. And that brings up a huge problem. This phrase is seen throughout this entire chapter. It continuously calls Isaac the only son. But just 1 chapter earlier, in Genesis 21, Ishmael is very much alive. He gets kicked out into the desert, but survives, and God even blesses him. So either Ishmael no longer counts, which is highly suspect, or the narrative is lying to itself to make Isaac's claim to legitimacy look even stronger, which makes perfect sense if you consider my paternity theory. Then we also have after these things, meaning after God let Abraham lie again and abandon Hagar and Ishmael, he now decides it's time to test Abraham. And what's the test? Oh, just casually murder your son. Not in war, not as punishment, but as a burnt offering on a mountain for God. This chapter is often attributed to God testing Abraham to see his faithfulness. But if God is omniscient, he'd already know the depth of Abraham's faith, right? So why the test? It raises questions about whether an all-knowing supposed God would need to find out anything at all. Which, by the way, this also makes 0 covenantal sense. Isaac is supposed to be the miracle child, the one through whom all of God's promises flow. So why command his death? Either God changed his mind, or the story's daring you not to notice the contradiction. If you look at Genesis 17, God promises Isaac as the covenant child through whom his everlasting promises will flow. God literally says, I will establish my covenant with him, meaning Isaac, for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Now here in Genesis 22, he says, hey, murder the kid. So if God already promised descendants through Isaac, how can he ask Abraham to kill him? Either God changed his mind, which is a theological no-no, because remember, God can't change his mind, or he always intended to stop Abraham, which by definition makes the test dishonest, or God lied to Abraham about the promise. It breaks the internal logic of an all-knowing, promise-keeping God. Emotional tension is built up so thickly with your son, your only son, the one whom you love, that if you just said kill Isaac, it wouldn't have the same impact. The narrative is stalling, stretching out the horror so it hits the reader in the gut. And with Ishmael already off stage, your only one becomes a legal claim, an attempt to clean up any doubts about who the real father is. It's not just poetic repetition here, it's manipulation. And it should be noted because God knows exactly who he's talking about. This isn't about clarity. It appears to be about dragging out the emotional pressure for effect. And the silence here, deafening. It's also worth noting that Abraham argues with God about Sodom, pleads, negotiates, haggles down the destruction of a city full of strangers, but here, when it's his own son, nothing, not a single word. Either his moral compass broke, or he knows something we're not being told. In Genesis 18, Abraham argues with God for the lives of strangers in Sodom, the whole, if there are 50 righteous people, et cetera, all the way down to 10-bit. Go check out that chapter. It's on the playlist. But now here in Genesis 22, silence. Not a single protest. No bargaining, no questions, just 3 days of travel, wood chopping, and dead eyes. So let's make sure you believers are getting this. The guy who pleaded for random criminals doesn't say one word when God tells him to burn his own son alive. That's what you guys believe, right? I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. Let me know in the comments section. Either his moral compass snapped clean in half, or this isn't just a test of faith. It's a convenient way to dispose of a kid he never fully believed was his in the first place. Because if there's even a sliver of doubt about Isaac's paternity, if that whole Abimelech fiasco still lingers, then this isn't some noble obedience arc. It's a ritual cleanse disguised as devotion. And let's be realistic, people have killed for way less than what Abraham ends up getting. Land, legacy, divine favor, eternal name recognition. That knife didn't just hover over a son, it hovered over a scandal. And once it came down, all gone, just saying. Anyway, as you can clearly see here on the screen in the verses, Abraham doesn't ask a single question. No pushback, no hesitation. He wakes up early, saddles the ass, chops the wood, grabs Isaac, and sets off like God asked him to go borrow a cup of sugar down the road instead of commit child sacrifice. Notice that he cleaves the wood himself, even though he has servants. That's not logistics. That's a personal act. A man who prepares his own firewood for a human sacrifice is already mentally halfway there. Notice, too, that this is a 3-day trip. 3 days is a long time to think about how you're going to kill your own kid. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It's baffling to me how uneducated some of you actually are. Then there's verse 5, we will return. The Hebrew verb is plural. Turn back unto you is plural. Abraham doesn't say, I will come back. He says, we will come back. Is he lying, bluffing, prophesying? Whatever it is, it's strange. These are just servants. He didn't need to convince them of anything. So who's he trying to convince here? Them? Isaac? Himself? Who knows? Still very odd. Abraham puts the wood on Isaac's back. Symbolic much? Isaac's carrying the instrument of his own death, while Abraham carries the fire and the knife, the tools to kill him with. One is shouldering the burden, the other's hiding the intent. Then Isaac speaks, his only line in the whole scene, my father. And Abraham replies, here I am, my son. The first time he calls him that directly. A sudden burst of paternity just as Isaac starts to do the math. Isaac asks, so, hey, where's the lamb? Abraham's response is loaded. He doesn't say God will provide for my son. He says God will provide, comma, my son. That's not faith. That's quiet confession. He's telling Isaac indirectly but clearly that he's the lamb. And Isaac says nothing, just walks. They reach the spot. Abraham builds the altar himself. He arranges the wood. He ties up Isaac. Then he raises the knife to slaughter him. Not to ponder, not to hesitate, to slaughter. The same Hebrew word used in ritual animal killings, shakat. The exact term from Leviticus when you're slicing the throat of a sheep. This isn't poetic imagery. This is sacrificial butchery, straight out of temple procedure. And here's what we're not supposed to ask. How exactly did he bind Isaac? Isaac's not 5 here. He just carried a bunch of wood on his back. He's probably in his late teens or 20s. So either Isaac was tricked, completely brainwashed, or he already knew and didn't resist. And if he didn't resist, then where's the help? If Isaac is supposed to be the poster child of obedient faith, why Isn't he assistant? Why is Abraham doing everything solo here? Stacking stones, arranging wood, setting the stage, while Isaac is nowhere in the scene. You'd think if Isaac was so gung-ho about being sacrificed, he'd at least help build the altar first, but nope. The text doesn't say he helps, it just says he gets tied down. So maybe Abraham tied him up before the setup, maybe Isaac's already lying there like a hunk of cargo, silent, motionless, decorative, because for someone allegedly all in on his own execution, he's curiously passive. Devout? Maybe. Or maybe just already restrained. That's why this part gets its own name in Jewish tradition, the binding. Not the test, not the sacrifice, just the binding, because that's the part that scars. That's the trauma that never gets spoken aloud. Everyone watches these true crime docu-series and cult exposés like The Vow, Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, The Path, and Under the Banner of Heaven, and they're all horrified. People binge watch them while texting. Can you believe these parents let their kids go through that? But here, in Genesis 22, it's the exact same thing, except now it's sacred, holy, Sunday school material. You've got a father tying his son to a homemade altar because he thinks God told him to kill him, and not only does no one call CPS, it becomes the gold standard of faith. This isn't a fringe cult hiding in the woods, this is the founding patriarch of 3 major religions. And the knife? That's not just obedience, that's the final gesture in a ritual theater of paternity, a symbolic slaughter to say, he's mine. Any doubts about Abimelech? Gone. Burned with the ram. Sanitized by scripture. The blades in the air and God cuts in. Stop. Now I know you fear me, not love, not trust, fear. And then again we get the same paternity chant. Your son, your only one. What about a Ishmael? Well, I guess we never heard of him as of right now. Isaac is the one that matters, the chosen one, the claimed one. This wasn't about love. It was about fear, obedience, and unquestioning loyalty. Kind of mafia stylist, if you ask me. Knife-ready loyalty. And for those who say this proves God is against child sacrifice, really? Because God doesn't stop the act with moral horror. He stops it with approval. He says, now I know you fear me. So you can stop with that right now and go back and read your own book. Let's also point out here that God condemns human sacrifice. Later, let's look at Leviticus 18:21. It says, do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Molech. And Deuteronomy 12:31 says, they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices, which the Lord hates. So God hates it, but he sure asked for Abraham to do it here. So here, in Genesis 22, God literally says, offer your son as a burnt offering. And it's not metaphorical. He says, burnt offering, olah, the same word used for animal sacrifice throughout Leviticus. Some try to justify this by arguing the prohibition applies to pagan deities like Molech, yet the ethical implications don't magically vanish. It's still child sacrifice, whichever deity or god you're sacrificing to. So, just to be clear, in case you didn't catch it the first time I went over it here, God condemns exactly what he commands here. So is child sacrifice bad or good? And it just depends on which God you're sacrificing to. The reward wasn't for refusing, it was for being ready to do it. Suddenly, ram in a bush, no build-up, no foreshadowing, just a surprise, sacrifice substitute unlocked, and just to complete the divine branding, this is the mountain that later becomes the site of the temple in Jerusalem, because what better place to build your holy headquarters than where you almost murdered your son? And structurally, the whole story folds in on itself. A chiastic arc, divine call, journey, altar, knife, then the reversal, altar, journey, divine call, like a theological palindrome wrapped around a trauma scene. Abraham grabs it, slaughters it, and renames the mountain Yahweh provides. But what did Yahweh provide exactly? A psychological test dressed up as theology? A way to whitewash a paternity scandal? A convenient ram at the 11th hour? This wasn't rescue, it was spin. A last-second swap to keep the sacrifice on brand while attempting to dodge the trauma. And Isaac, still silent. And here's where it gets darker. If he goes along with this willingly, that's not obedience, that's indoctrination. The only thing scarier than a father raising a knife is a son who thinks that's holy. Maybe he was so desperate for Abraham's approval he went along with it. Maybe he thought this was love. The angel returns, dishes out divine blessings like candy, descendants, power, global legacy, and all because Abraham was willing to kill his son. And once more we see the your only son. The text won't stop repeating it because this isn't about sacrifice, it's about legitimacy. A divine paternity test, which they passed with flying bloody colors. This is the last time Abraham speaks directly to God. After this moment, the line goes completely dead between Abraham and God. Bet your pastor forgot to mention that little tidbit, huh? Let that sink into your little brain, believers. And it says, and then Abraham turned back. Just Abraham, not Isaac. He doesn't speak, doesn't walk down the mountain with his dad. The two are never seen together again. The relationship? Banished. The test didn't end with a ram, it ended with a severed bond. The knife didn't land, but the damage did. Isaac completely vanishes from the scene like a trauma victim. The narrative is done with. And centuries later, the New Testament tries to rewrite this moment in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 19, claiming Abraham believed God would raise Isaac from the dead. It says, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. But Genesis 22 never says this. He doesn't seem confident. He doesn't say God will resurrect Isaac. He just gets up early and starts chopping wood. The New Testament authors tried to make Abraham's motives better by sanitizing the horror. But it's not better. It's horrible. This is a horrible story. Right after the most traumatic event in Isaac's life, the story pivots to a family newsletter. Here's a list of your nephews. One of them fathered Rebecca, who'll marry Isaac. Cool, but Isaac? Still missing. No lines, no exit, no healing arc, just erased. Because the test is over, the claim has been made, the bloodline secured. And if you linger too long in the horror, you might start asking the wrong question. So the story says, look, Chaz and Buz, let's move on. And if the tonal whiplash feels weird, like you just got hit with trauma and then a genealogy, that might be because you're reading a stitched together narrative. Different source layers, different agendas. Welcome to Ancient Redaction. This whole narrative isn't about morality, it's not about love, it's about obedience, spin, and inheritance. Your only son is repeated like a mantra to erase Ishmael and enshrine Isaac as the uncontested heir. The knife scene, that was a performance, a branding exercise, a ritualized, manipulative way to say, he's mine. And Isaac, never the protagonist. Just a test. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.